Good morning, everyone.
Hey.
Welcome to Netbase Live.
We're back.
We're back.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lorraine. What a party last night.
Oh my God.
Did everyone go to the party last night?
So it was amazing. We had so much fun. Have you been home yet?
I don't know. I'm wearing my costume still. I don't think so.
Oh, me too. Well, we've just been having a great time. Let's drink these Bloody Marys, and I think we'll be good to go.
Yeah.
Cheers.
I don't know which one. Is this 2 or 3?
It's however many you need.
How many you need?
I stopped counting. But you know, Paige, we better drink these because we got a lot left to cover today, right?
We do. We have an amazing second day here at Netbase Live. We have 3 keynote sessions, 2 this morning, 1 this afternoon, and we have 9 additional breakout sessions.
Awesome.
Truly amazing content today. And what we're doing is going to start it off with our first keynote. He's a former executive speaker, executive at MTV and Sony. He's also the author of Vaporized and International Book of the Year. And with that, I'd like to welcome Robert Tercek, TED speaker, creative strategist, innovation expert.
Thank you. Thanks, Paige. Hey, good morning. I'm thrilled to be here. When the folks from Netbase invited me to come and give a talk, my usual topic would be something about the future of media, the evolution of media, a very appropriate subject for this group. But I said, you know, there's a different topic I want to address, and something very grave. There's a crisis happening in social media today. It's of the utmost importance, and I think it's time for us to have a discussion about the rules of the road, the rules that govern discourse in social media. Now, I want to warn you that I'm going to show some graphic examples of abuse in social media. And I understand this is a business organization, this is a business event. You didn't come here expecting to see this kind of content, and so I wanted to give you a heads up about that. It's not my intention to shock or offend anybody, but I do want to share some vivid examples because we've heard about this topic. Some of you have read about the subject, but not everybody's seen examples of this, and so I gave some careful thought to some examples that I want to share with you. Before I jump into that, though, I want to explain this metaphor, the rules of the road. I want to talk about roads. I'm going to talk about streets and highways. You know, in the United States, we have a very robust and mature infrastructure. Our transportation network has been well established. There's 4 million miles of roads in the United States. And so we tend to take the roads for granted. We don't really think about, gee, how am I going to get from point A to point B? If there's some construction or a road is closed, you can just route around it. You have a lot of different choices. What we tend to take for granted in the United States is that behind those streets, there is literally tens of thousands of rules and regulations that govern our behavior on those roads, govern how people operate their motor vehicles, and govern how other people interact with motor vehicles on the roads. Things that keep us safe, things like crosswalks for pedestrians and stoplights and stop signs, even things like reflective paint that help us see at nighttime. We tend to take that for granted. Most important thing we take for granted is the fact that other drivers know about these rules, and we just assume when we get in our car that everybody's operating by the same set of rules. And so in the United States, we're kind of sleepwalking through this because we've been conditioned to these rules and regulations for so many years that the only way we can become aware of that environment is to step out of it completely. When the folks from Netbase reached out to me to come speak to you, I happened to be in Bhutan. I was working there, which is a little bit weird because most people who go to Bhutan are there to go trekking, or they're on a meditation retreat, or they're Buddhists and they're visiting temples. But I happened to be in Bhutan for business purposes. Now, Bhutan, if you're not familiar with it, is a small country the size of Switzerland, and it's wedged in the Himalayas right between China and India. So it's a mountainous place. And the geography there is quite vivid. It's one of the most beautiful countries in the world. It's basically a series of gorges or canyons that are carved by snowmelt that's coming off of the ice pack in the Himalayas. So it's a vertical country. The country consists of a series of valleys. And as a result, the roads aren't on a grid-based pattern. The roads in Bhutan follow the contours of the valleys and the rivers themselves. And as you can see, it's quite precipitous. The roads are clinging to the sides of these very steep declivities and ravines. Now, I happened to spend a lot of time in cars when I was there, and it always seems like it takes a couple hours to get from point A to point B, and you're always traveling on the same set of roads. There just aren't that many roads in this mountainous country. So often there's a traffic jam. You're following behind a truck. In Bhutan, they didn't have a commercial airport in Bhutan until 1988. This is a country where everything comes in by road. There's no seaport. It's a mountain country. Everything comes in by road, and so all the gas, all the oil, all the diesel, all the food, everything is delivered by road. So there's a lot of trucks, there's a lot of road traffic. And the roads are shared by just about everybody because it's the only way to get from one place to another. So there's still school children and people who go shopping. Every time you come around a blind curve, you'll find animals like horses and cows in the middle of the road. It's like a video game when you're driving. You have to be really, really alert. And often when you come around the curve, you'll find a mudslide has wiped out the road. So it became kind of a common thing for me when I was there. I was there during monsoon season. It became kind of a common thing that we had to actually pull over and stop and wait for a backhoe to come clear the road 45 minutes later so that we could actually continue on our journey. So here, a lot of the assumptions that we have about roads, I was shaken out of those. I was made quite keenly aware of the fact that in Bhutan, they haven't quite developed the same level of infrastructure in their roads. So road safety is not at the same level that you would expect in the United States. So for instance, here you can see on the side of the road, there's a sort of cement curb, a concrete curb, but that really wouldn't stop you if your car was going to, careen into the canyon. It wouldn't really stop your car. And in many places, there's just a sign that says, please drive carefully. Other places, they just have some sticks on the side of the road that kind of indicate where the road ends, or maybe that's where they indicate the edge of the road when there's a lot of snowfall. They pile it up there. And yet in other places, there is nothing between you and a 200-foot drop into an icy river. And of course, there are deadly consequences to this. I saw many accidents there while I was there. In one afternoon, I saw 2 fatal car crashes where cars went off the ravine. So this is a shot I took standing on the road looking down at a car that 45 minutes earlier had smashed, and both the passenger and driver were killed instantly on impact. So there are some deadly consequences to this. This made me freshly aware of the fact that we have this robust road infrastructure, and we've kind of internalized the rules of the road in the United States. We don't even think about it. We're unconscious of those rules. The entire time I was driving around on these roads in Bhutan, I was keenly conscious of the fact that I depended, for my safety, on other drivers' behavior. People are constantly passing each other on these two-way roads, and you're banking on the fact that the other driver knows what he or she is doing, and that they're operating from the same rule book. 10 years ago, I worked for Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker, and he told me many interesting things. One of the things he said to me was, Rob, people tell me that they have no faith. And I ask them, do you ever drive on a 2-lane highway at nighttime? It's a really interesting thought, right? Every time you get in a vehicle, even if you don't have any religious faith, every time you get in a vehicle, you operate from the conviction that the other drivers on the road are using the exact same rules. They're observing the exact same rules that you have. You couldn't get into a car. You wouldn't drive on a 2-lane road if you didn't have an absolute conviction that the other drivers on the road were operating from the exact same playbook. We take this for granted today. But 100 years ago, this wasn't the case in the United States. 100 years ago, when the automobile was introduced, there were no rules of the road. Of course, we'd had roads for thousands of years. The Romans built 50,000 miles of roads throughout Europe and Asia Minor. So we had roads, but we didn't have rules of the road because everything moved at a stately pace. The fastest thing on the road was a horse and buggy. So it didn't really move that much faster than a person. You could get out of the way in time. When the automobile was introduced, the infrastructure wasn't ready for it. The automobile was a deadly phenomenon in the first 30 years, from 1900 to 1930. There were a series of gruesome accidents, and they happened on a daily basis. We don't know this today because it's kind of been washed away in history, but there are accidents all the time. So what happened with the automobile between 1908 and 1918 was geometric growth, something that's happening right now with social media, and you can see the parallel. In 1908, there were thousands of vehicles. By 1918, there were millions of vehicles on the road. So we went from thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions of vehicles in a period of time when the infrastructure simply couldn't keep up. It couldn't catch up, nor could the rules and regulations. And something similar is happening in social media today. We're going, in the last 15 years, we've gone from millions to tens to hundreds of millions to more than 1 billion people using social media. All newcomers. Think of it as if there were 1 billion new drivers on the road who didn't know the same rules that you know. So in the auto world, in the period from 1900 to 1930, it was an automotive free-for-all. Accidents were the norm. They were a daily occurrence. In Detroit, in one summer in 1908, a child was killed on the road every single day during that summer until there was outcry, and then they finally organized a local police force, a traffic police force. It didn't exist before that. There was no accountability, no liability. There were no left turn laws. There were no street signs. There were no intersections, no stoplights. There was no such thing as a crosswalk. Pedestrians had to jump out of the way of cars or they'd get hit, and it happened all the time. People were getting mowed down. It took a full century for us to establish the rules of the road. Those rules that we're so conditioned to, that we take for granted, it took a full century for us to come to an understanding of what rules we need to govern people's behavior. From the first speed limit that was introduced in 1901 to mandatory airbags that were introduced in 1998. A full century before we had the rules that we all take for granted today. And of course, the result of this is tremendous safety. A lot of us tend to think, oh, gee, the rules of the road, the interaction with the highway patrol, it's about speed limits, it's about stopping people from speeding. No, it's there to keep you safe. It's there to keep other drivers safe. It's there to make sure that dangerous drivers are taken off the road. Now, this chart shows you motor vehicle accidents per mile driven. The red line shows the annual deaths. And as you can see, in the very early days, deaths were very common. Driving in a car was frequently a deadly experience. But that red line plummets as the number of new rules and regulations is introduced. And as you can see from the blue line, that's the number of vehicle miles driven. So there's been a 300x increase in the number of vehicle miles driven, but at the same time, the number of road deaths has decreased tremendously. So that's a real success story. It's one that we often don't think about. It's one that we take for granted. I believe that social media today is kind of at the same point that our roads were at in 1908. We know we've got a problem, but we don't have the infrastructure to deal with it just yet. We don't have rules of the road. We haven't established it. It's a lawless environment. And miscreants, people who don't observe common courtesy, are getting away with murder. I've been involved in social media since the 1990s. When I worked at Sony, I introduced the very first social games. We introduced chat and communication inside of game rooms. That was revolutionary at that time in the early days of dial-up internet and online gaming. In 2011, Jason Kalkanis, who's a friend of mine, he runs This Week in Startups and the Launch Conference, he invited me to guest host an episode of a show, This Week in Social Media, and I liked it. It was a great time. 2011 was an incredible time. 2012, that period was an exciting time for social media. So I ended up hosting a series of discussions on that show for about 20 episodes. And at that time, if you recall, that was when Arab Spring was happening, so there's quite a lot to talk about because this is the first time we saw social media used for more than just idle chit-chat and banter, but actually used for socially progressive causes. So across North Africa, beginning in Tunisia and Egypt, and then spreading across the Levant and the North African region and the Arab region, we saw an awakening. We saw people using social media to organize and to talk about politics. Sometimes when there were no official channels for them to communicate, they could use these informal communication channels. At the same time, and it was no coincidence, it wasn't just an accident, these two groups were coordinated. We saw the rise of the Occupy movement, first in New York, then in Los Angeles, and then in 900 cities across the country. And we had the opportunity to interview these people on our show and talk to them, talk about how they coordinated with the people in Tahrir Square in Egypt at the same time. Those two events were going on and they were supporting each other with tips, techniques, and so forth. They were sharing best practices at that time. And so we talked about that on the show. And since that time, we've seen a number of other similar social revolutions or Twitter revolutions, social media revolutions, recently in Turkey, in Taksim Square, and 2 years ago, in 2014, the Umbrella Revolution in Hong Kong. This is a very exciting concept for us. For the first time in the world, we started to see that people power at massive scale could actually transform a society, that an unpopular government could be ousted when people organize, when they find a new channel. And so there was great levity and great optimism in the world of social media in this period of time. In particular, we noted the emergence of something rather new, something that hitherto had never been seen before in politics, which I call a spontaneous, leaderless, self-organizing, autonomous network. I know it's a mouthful. But if you think about that, this is not a political party. This isn't a union. This isn't a movement with a charismatic leader. This is a leaderless group that organizes itself through social media. They find each other through social media. They hammer out their causes that they care about through social media. They decide what actions to take and coordinate those actions through social media. This is a political creature that couldn't exist without social media, and that was cause for some optimism at the time. But now, looking back 5 years later, from the vantage point of 2016, I think we will all agree that the Twitter revolution failed. It didn't just fail a little bit, it failed colossally. Tunisia is the only country where we can say a democratic regime was in place. Egypt today is a dictatorship. There are tens of thousands of political prisoners in jail in Egypt today. Libya is a mess, it's chaos there, and Syria is a war zone. In Turkey, the social gains were rolled back. They also have what's starting to become an autocratic, possibly dictatorship government. And so across the board, we've seen that the gains in this early outburst, these early autonomous networks, they were unable to sustain and keep those gains. Now at the time, even as we were doing this coverage and reporting about these topics, we noted that governments were quite interested in social media. Sometimes they would try to shut off Twitter. Sometimes they would try to penetrate Twitter or spy on people in Twitter. So autocratic governments were quite keenly interested. What we didn't expect was another kind of backlash. Now, what we know from history is when a revolution fails, it doesn't just stop. The momentum continues, but it takes on a darker tone. And I think we can say that we are now in the terror phase, just like the French Revolution. We're now in the terror phase of social media revolution. I'm referring, of course, to ISIS. It's been widely publicized. You see, in the Middle East, governments weren't the only one who noticed that social media was a powerful tool for organizing people. Terror groups also started to notice that, and they started to take advantage of it. Most spectacularly, ISIS, by using Twitter to post grisly, gruesome visuals, videotapes of atrocities and executions. They used Instagram and memes to communicate, to send out their message, and to make contact with people. They used Twitter to organize and coordinate their movements, exactly the same way the Occupy group had done it. Today, they've switched over to encrypted channels like Telegram. Same concept, though. From a remote location, they can coordinate the activities of other people. Thousands of volunteers around the world helped ISIS organize their own pages on Twitter and Facebook. These are the examples from Indonesia and the Philippines, thousands of miles away from where they're based in Syria and Iraq. And they ran circles around the United States government. They actually were quite vexing to the US military. At one point, ISIS hacked the US Central Command's Twitter account and changed the graphics. That's what we're showing right here. They took over and they sort of put up a mocking graphic there, I love ISIS. More chillingly, ISIS started to use social media. They started to track US soldiers in social media and find out which troops were being deployed to which place. So the United States government had to start to train soldiers to use social media differently. By last year, the Pentagon actually admitted that ISIS was running circles around the US, at least in terms of the social media warfare, that they had developed a much more sophisticated approach, and the United States could not keep up. We did learn one lesson, though. The United States military did start to track ISIS and their frequent use of social media for geotagging, and they started to use that for targeting with the JDAM, those smart bombs that they use. They're using those geocoordinates to attack, so they actually can pinpoint people using their social media accounts. So we sort of wised up. It took us a couple of years, but the United States government stepped up. It's safe to say then that this revolution has evolved into a war. There is a war happening in social media. We've militarized social media, and it's not limited to ISIS. This example hasn't been limited to ISIS. It's not just in the Middle East. It's started to spread around the world, and the rapidity of the spread. This is all happening in a period of 2 or 3 years. We're starting to see now the Chinese government has an estimated 2 million people on the payroll, trolls, hackers, people who will go into message boards and mess up the message boards, interfere with discussions that are there. 2 million people. They call them the 50-cent army. And it's not just to manage internal discussion in China. They also use this as a form of foreign policy outreach, and they interfere with elections in other countries like in Taiwan. They're across the Taiwan Strait. It's not just China. A research paper that was published pointed out a very important fact. The Chinese government isn't funding trolling on the internet in order to persuade anyone or to convince anyone or engage in a logical or reasoned debate with anyone. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to mess up the debate. It's to disrupt the dialogue. They call it strategic distraction. And it actually is a page taken from the classic Soviet disinformation campaign strategies of propaganda that came in the Cold War in the 1940s and the 1950s, which is the best way to undermine a democracy and to undermine discussions about democracy is to create confusion, to create an element of doubt, to cast doubt on both sides of the issue so that it's not so clear-cut, to gray it, to blur the boundaries. And that's what they're seeking to achieve with their 50-cent army, with these 2 million trolls. This is happening around the world, in the Philippines, in both sides of the Palestinian-Israeli debate, both in the Gaza Strip and also in Israel, where they're paying students now to blog pro-Israeli messages and to troll message boards and post positive messages. It's happening in India, in the Kashmiri debate. On both sides, they're using social media to campaign, to disrupt dialogue. And also North Korea is getting into the act. Perhaps most chillingly, though, is the Soviet Union. Russia. Russia, they're back. Quietly, Vladimir Putin has reassembled the KGB, and he has reassembled the propaganda initiatives that reigned during the time when it was the Soviet Union. The same techniques are being used today. And again, there are thousands of people on the payroll. Estimates range from 2,000 to 40,000 paid trolls who work for the Russian government, sometimes in a freelance capacity, always in an unofficial capacity. Their job is to disrupt dialogue. Earlier this year, in the spring, I was working in Finland and in the Baltic region. And everyone I spoke to there talked about how much interference they were seeing in social media in those countries from Russian trolls. Russian trolls would come in and just disrupt the dialogue. And they would post stuff that was irrelevant. They would post stuff that was incredibly inflammatory or offensive. The whole idea was to simply derail the dialogue and also to create a sense of doubt, to create a sense of dissent. And so the Russians are also weaponizing social media. The United States is trying to respond. We're aware of this. We're attempting to respond, but our hands are tied. As a democracy, we're not likely to hire a bunch of trolls to go out there and post propaganda. And so you can imagine then that the approach from autocratic countries is that they can actually find a weak spot in a democracy. They can disrupt dialogue. They can create dissent between allies. And this is something that's actually being orchestrated right now in NATO. So all this dark dialogue you hear about NATO, the doubts about NATO, you've heard it in the US election campaign this year, all those doubts, those are being seeded in some large part by Russians, by Russian propagandists. Some people call this Cold War Part 2, a new Cold War that's happening. It's happening in social media. Now, it's incredibly effective. It's also incredibly cost effective. This is a very cheap way to disrupt dialogue and to create doubt. I want to point out that this isn't limited to countries like China or the Philippines or Russia. To some extent, this idea of politicizing and weaponizing social media has also begun to penetrate Western democracies. But we do it in a different way. So here's a great example. In January 2015 in France, there were great demonstrations. Remember the Charlie Hebdo attacks, the previous set of attacks, not the most recent ones, but the previous set of attacks? There's a huge outpouring of support. People came out in the streets and marched. And you may have seen this photograph because it was released in newspapers around the world. This is a photograph of world leaders and European leaders locking arms with Francois Hollande, marching, ostensibly marching in the streets at the front of those great big demonstrations in Paris. And people talked about it on Twitter. They said, oh, isn't it great to see world leaders marching arm in arm to protest against these attacks and to show solidarity with the French people. And so that seemed really great until someone pointed out that that photo was actually just a photo op that was taken on a closed-off street many blocks away from where the actual demonstrations and marches were happening. And these world leaders simply came out for a photo opportunity and posed as if they were leading that group. They weren't actually part of that demonstration. They weren't even present for that demonstration. And so even here, we see some form of official deception through social media. In the United States, during this political campaign, we've seen accusations on all parties, from both parties, on all sides of the debate, that social media is being trolled by one party or the other. Here's a sampling of headlines, but it isn't hard to find these. There are literally thousands of accusations, and it's hard to determine which of these is accurate, which of them isn't accurate. You know, people are saying that the Democrats are hiring paid shills. Other people are saying that the Trump campaign has paid shills. Some people even claim that the Russians are interfering with the US political process with paid trolls and paid shills. At any rate, it seems quite clear that there is some measure of political activity that is paid, that is not with the intention to have a political debate, political discourse, an exchange of ideas, or any kind of constructive conversation, but instead it's there to disrupt, derail the conversation. Now, in the past, we could have relied on a robust news force, journalists, to defend us from false information. But sadly, that's not the case. And one of the consequences of the rise of the internet and the success of digital media in general has been the demise of traditional journalism, the traditional publications. And so that defense, that barrier, that firewall for democracy is no longer as robust as it used to be because journalism has been greatly weakened amid the glut of content that's happening on the internet. Americans no longer trust mass media. You hear this all the time. People say, oh, the media is biased, I don't trust the media, and so forth. There's a great suspicion towards traditional mainstream media. And it is true, for 30 years, our news gathering forces have been cored out. We've been cutting budgets. This way predates the internet. This goes back to media consolidation in the 1990s. Newsroom budgets have been cut, news bureaus have been closed, investigative journalism budgets have been cut, and now news crews are reduced to shooting things. They don't even have a news crew or a video crew. They're reduced to shooting their own spots with a selfie stick. So this is kind of like the reduction of mainstream news gathering. There's a second consequence, which is that in the newsroom, fact checkers and editors have also been cut. And so the ability of the newspaper to filter out, ferret out false information and stop it before it gets posted, that ability has been gone. So we've seen a number of publications post false news or misleading news or inaccurate news, and they're having to fact check in real time. And that's shifted things somewhat. That's also kind of eroded the credibility of our publications. One good illustration of this, how this works, is a news story that came out in the beginning of October, around October 3rd or October 4th. You may have noticed this story. It came up. It was up, very big story for a very short period of time because it was completely false. The story was that Hillary Clinton had ordered a drone attack on Julian Assange. This is right after all those leaks, the WikiLeaks came out about Hillary Clinton's email. And so this story appeared, and it was circulated widely, particularly among right-leaning media, naturally, because it's a negative story about the Democrats. It turns out it's 100% false. And so some people did a kind of forensic analysis of where did this story actually come from. The United States is not in the habit of doing a drone strike on an embassy. Julian Assange is in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. The United States is not in the habit of drone striking embassies, so it's a completely fallacious story. It's a ridiculous story on the face of it. But it was widely reported. Well, what happened is a satirical news site, a fake news site, posted the story as a joke. It was satire. But it was picked up by some right-wing bloggers. And then other right-wing journalists started to notice this was going on, and they commented on the commentary. And so you start to have a layer of meta commentary in the blogosphere that eventually gets reported upon as news and picked up by Fox News. And so it goes from fiction and satire into commentary and the punditocracy, and thereby it becomes a news event on its own, and it's reported as fact. So that's how a fake story can become a real story. So what we've done in the last 20 years is we've started to replace journalists with pundits. We now have opinion, which is far cheaper to produce than actual investigative journalism and facts. Our debates now consist of blunt contradiction. You think about the debate, you've seen it so many times, where Trump says wrong, wrong, wrong. He's not trying to make a case. He's not trying to positively affirm. He's not trying to persuade you. He's simply bluntly contradicting the other party. Assertions devoid of facts instead of reasoned argument. And perhaps most troubling of all, passion and emotion instead of logic and reason. That's why we're so inflamed right now. And it's not just the United States. This is happening around the world. So this is all an artifact of this transition that we're moving through. This is all fallout from the transition in traditional media. And as it turns out, it's really easy to disrupt things. There's a kind of fetish here in the Bay Area with this concept of disruption, digital disruption, transformative disruption. We worship the concept. Entire companies are started with the premise that they're going to disrupt one old industry after another. Disruption is easy. It's like throwing a brick through the window. What's hard is to build new, durable, trustworthy institutions, and there we failed tremendously. If you look at the new news organizations that have risen up, these organizations aren't there to be trustworthy or valid or fact-checked. They're there to inflame opinion. They're there to take the most extreme and lurid stories and rumors and turn them into fact, manufacture them into news stories. This is a very profitable business. And along with it, probably the most pernicious trend that's happening right now is the idea that PR is beginning to replace journalism. There have been a series of stories, most notably in the Financial Times. They call it the invasion of corporate news. As newspapers fold and as journalists are laid off, they're being rehired, but they're being rehired by PR firms to write fake journalism. And these stories are incredibly effective because journalists know how to write a good story. They know how to put together a news item that'll get picked up and carried by the wire. For every journalist working in America today, there are almost 5 PR people. And that's up 30% from a decade ago. And on average, working journalists are paid only 65% of what a PR person is paid. When I was researching this part, I found ads that were aimed at journalists and journalists who'd just been laid off, and it said, come over to the dark side, you can make more money. Come over to the dark side. That's how they're attracting and recruiting journalists to write PR articles. It's no surprise to find out that the oil industries and the traditional energy industries that are so actively campaigning against climate change reporting, that they're funding this kind of political news, these kind of PR stories as fake news. But actually, sometimes the stories are quite surprising. The egg industry spent about $50,000 or $60,000 on content marketing that was designed to destroy a vegan mayonnaise substitute. This is the kind of situation we found ourselves in, where PR stories are used to kind of undermine a proposition to replace debate, but it's a surreptitious attack. It's not an overt attack. Again, it's not a reasoned argument. It's not an overt discussion or exchange of opinions. It's a form of propaganda. And in social media, The hottest story sells. The most inflamed story sells. Whatever's loud seems to be true. As Ev Williams, the founder of Twitter and Medium, said, we put junk food in front of people on social media, and they just seem to eat it up. 61% of millennials, 6 out of 10 millennials, get their news from Facebook. This is a fact that should make your blood run cold. Facebook isn't known for credible news gathering. They're not known for fact-checking. Recently, they were accused in their trending news stories of having a left-wing bias. I don't know if that was actually true or not, but as a result, they took the human journalists off, the human editors off, and they let the robots run it, and the algorithm started to promote fake news stories. So Facebook is now a mechanism for disseminating fake news. When people say, I don't believe liberal media, what they really mean is, I don't believe in fact-checked news. I've given up on it. I believe in partisan news. I believe I can choose my own facts. And the consequences for democracy are tremendous and all negative. 70% of Americans don't know how our actual government works. They're not informed enough to make a decision in an election. Most Americans are misinformed about climate change. Some Americans don't have any understanding of how vaccines actually work. 30% of Americans believe that there's a connection to autism. This has never been proven in science. But the idea, this pernicious notion keeps coming up again and again and again. It's a good story. It gets a lot of buzz in social media. Apparently 1 in 4 Americans is unaware that the Earth revolves around the sun. This is a sad state of affairs, folks, particularly in a political year. Sad state of affairs. Okay, so there are real conflicts in this world. These are genuine conflicts. There are 2 sides. And I could fill 10 more pages with similar conflicts. This is hardly an exhaustive list. There are conflicts happening everywhere. Social media is not going to solve these problems. I don't think that this group today is going to solve any of these debates. But the point I'm trying to make today is that these are irreconcilable differences, and they're being aired out in the court of public opinion. That's social media. That's what's happening. And both sides are arming themselves with the worst of the terrorist toolkit. So they're using the same techniques that ISIS has used, those same techniques to poison the debate, to destroy the credibility of the people on the other side of the argument. This is not a respectful conversation. This is not a constructive debate. We're using social media to amplify hate speech, to organize and coordinate mob attacks on those who speak out, particularly those who speak out and are trying to represent facts accurately. We use threats of violence to silence people. If that doesn't work, we dox them, reveal their information so that we can actually threaten them at home or threaten their children. Creating false information, false memes, false documents, false web pages with photoshopped images. These are documents you can never take down on the internet if you're the subject of this kind of an attack. You can't remove this stain. It's industrialized harassment. A good illustration of this came right out of the political campaign this year. The incredible, and I think shocking surge of anti-Semitic commentary directed at journalists who wrote about the Trump campaign, not even negatively. They simply reported on the Trump campaign. Iona Jaffe is a journalist in Russia, and she wrote about Melania Trump. And this is an image someone sent to her on her Twitter account. There's a picture of an Auschwitz inmate with her face photoshopped on it. Another person sent her this lovely image of a Jewish person being shot in the back of the head. This isn't an isolated incident. It's not just Julia Yaffe who's been on the receiving end of this. 800 Jewish journalists in the United States have been subject to a campaign of harassment, anti-Semitic harassment, through social media. New York Times deputy editor Jonathan Weissman shut down his Twitter account. He spent an entire day retweeting all the hate that had been sent to him. And his followers, he has tens of thousands of followers, and they were mystified. They said, why are you posting this horrible stuff? He said, I want you to see what's happening to me. I want you to see what's happening to American journalists. They're on the receiving end of this. This is now common practice. Every American journalist is on the receiving end of a hate campaign, an orchestrated hate campaign. So he shut down his Twitter account. Kurt Eichenwald writes for Newsweek. And he too reported on Trump, and he too was on the receiving end of a horrible anti-Semitic smear campaign. They went after his children. And when he complained about that on Twitter, the next thing that happened is someone sent him a video. Now, Kurt Eichenwald happens to be epileptic. And the video that he was sent is an epidogenic video. That means it can trigger an epileptic seizure. It's a flashing light. It was designed to inflict harm, physical harm on him. That's real malice delivered through Twitter. This is no longer a debate. This is arena combat. We've weaponized social media. Eli Pariser told us that we live in filter bubbles in social media. By this point, everyone's familiar with the concept. In the highly politicized and highly partisan world that we're in today, when you're inside a filter bubble, everything seems to be fair. Everyone's reaching for that terrorist toolkit. We hold ourselves to ridiculously impossible standards of ideological purity. And it doesn't matter to me which party, which campaign, or which issue we're talking about here. This is true for all of them because things have gotten so partisan. So inside the bubble, we hold ourselves up to a level of ideological purity that is impossible. And when we're criticized or when people differ, we act as if it's a siege mentality. And then we get to put on the mantle of victim status. And that actually justifies us in our sense of outrage. A great example of this is Donald Trump himself, who benefited from media exposure for the past 2 years. It catapulted him to the forefront of the Republican Party. And now he's claiming that he's the victim of a media smear campaign. Victim status justifies him in the view of his followers within his ideological bubble, his filter bubble. For those outside of the filter bubble, there's utter intolerance. It's a scorched earth policy. We dehumanize the people in the other camp. We dehumanize them, we vilify them, we call them names, we objectify them so we don't have to deal with them like human beings. And we threaten them. We threaten them, we silence them. This is the state of discourse in social media today. This is the environment that you're trying to market within. It's poisoned. Here's an example. A GOP congressional candidate named Mike Kravitz wrote to a journalist who was critical of him, and he said, "I hope you get raped by a Syrian refugee." This is a man who's running for office. This is how deranged people inside the filter bubble can be. We know why this happens. It's called the online disinhibition effect. Anonymity means that people don't know who we are. We can post whatever. There's no consequences. We're not there in front of them. There's no physical proximity. You don't have to see the person. They're dehumanized. They're detached from you. We're separated by time and space. And so there's a disinhibition effect that occurs, and people lose their sense of propriety. They begin to conduct themselves in ways they never would in real life. We say things, we threaten things that we would never utter in person, face to face. So we know that this happens. Back to my road metaphor, it's a little bit like road rage. Remember road rage? The big issue in LA where I lived about 10 years ago, where people were shooting each other from cars. Right? They would get so incensed in traffic that they would kind of become deranged and they would act irrationally. These are people who are normal people in day-to-day life, but occasionally they hit a switch, they flip a switch, and they become deranged, and they act in a disinhibited fashion. Now, this is where it matters for marketers. This dynamic is no longer confined to politics or geopolitics. It's starting to spill out of those domains into regular life and regular discussions. School teachers are starting to notice that Trump's manner of speaking is starting to affect the way bullies in the schoolyard operate. Time magazine says that we're losing internet culture to the culture of hate. Thanks to Facebook and Twitter, what used to be private conversations have now become public conversations. And I don't think we've fully come to grips with what the implications of that are. That happened in a very short period of time. So what's private has become public, and what's public is now political. And so you can suddenly find yourself on the receiving end of a hate attack when you're just chatting when you thought you were just chatting with your friends. Remember when I talked about the assumptions when we're driving on a road and you assume the other drivers are operating by the same set of rules? In social media, we don't have those rules. We don't know what to assume about other people. We assume we're having a private conversation amongst our friends. We're talking about things that most of us agree on. And then somebody chimes in, someone you don't even know will chime in with a comment, a hateful, attacking comment. And so what's private has become political. Today, free speech is used like a weapon. It's used like graffiti. I can go write something on your wall, and absolutely no consequences. I can write some hateful, nasty stuff on your wall. I can deface your wall and get away with it under the banner of free speech. There's no consequences for the people who attack. The alt-right trolls who are driving people out of Twitter right now, they're very proud of the fact that Hillary Clinton called them deplorables. They're printing T-shirts. They're wearing these T-shirts. This is a badge of honor for them. There are no consequences to miscreants. Now, people say, well, wait a minute, hang on a second. There's been trolling ever since the internet came around. Trolling is not a new phenomenon. That is true. That is true. From the earliest days of BBSs and message boards, there's been trolling. That's been true. Anybody who's been in the game industry knows that trolling has been a feature of network games since we introduced them in the 1990s. What's different today is industrial scale trolling. It's not just one person. One person can coordinate the activities, they can orchestrate the activities of tens of thousands of followers, and all of a sudden you have industrial scale trolling. It's like a human botnet fueled by hatred. One alt-right blogger can trigger thousands of people to follow in his path. One anti-Semite can trigger a reaction from thousands of people who follow on. And if you're on the receiving end of this, it's a terrible, terrible consequence. The effect then is that amplified free speech, hate speech, is drowning out other people's free speech. You'll often hear this free speech debate in social platforms. The social platforms like Twitter and Facebook say, we can't interfere with speech. We're not going to interfere with content because we're all about free speech. We're all about letting people talk to each other, and you just have to deal with it. If you hear things you don't like, you just have to cope with it. You just have to roll with it. Don't engage with it if you don't like it. Block that person. What they're missing is that these human botnets, where you have an orchestrator and then thousands of followers, they actually drown out other voices. They silence other voices. This is not about an exchange. This is not about an intelligent debate. This is not about an argument. This is not about persuasion. This is about shutting people down. One party is louder than the other. One party speaks with a bigger megaphone than the other, and they silence the other party. They are disrupting voices, disrupting discourse to silence people. Danielle Citron wrote a great book called Hate Crimes in Cyberspace. I recommend it. I think it's important for every social media marketer to understand these dynamics. And she makes a very good point about the free speech debate. She says, it is true that those who use social media to express hateful ideas, they have a right to do so. They have that right. But on the other side, there are people on the receiving end of those messages. And those people also have a right to speak. And it's not fair and it's not right that the expressive rights of one group should trump the expressive rights of another group. That's what's unfair. That's what Danielle Citron said. A good example of this is Sue Perkins, who's a beloved newscaster in the UK. There was a false story that came out about her and the show Top Gear. And fans of Top Gear went kind of crazy. They got this bee in their bonnet, they came after her, and they started sending death threats to her. And finally she got a death threat that said they would like to see her burn to death. And she said, okay, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here, goodbye Twitter, I'm off Twitter for a while. And so she went away. They're silencing people, they're driving people out. The problem with the situation is that all the onus falls on the victims. There's no guardrails, there's no rules, there's no consequences for the attackers. All the onus falls on the victims. People have developed interesting strategies for dealing with this. If you look at millennials, their behavior is quite telling. They're quite conscious of the fact that they're in this glass fishbowl. They can be attacked at any time. And so a lot of millennial kids who are using Instagram, they have two accounts. They have Finstagram and Rinstagram. Finstagram is the fake Instagram account. That's the public one, and they let people sound off and say horrible things. And then the Rinstagram, that's the real Instagram account. That's the one they keep with their friends. That's a private one, and they don't want to hear from other people in there, and they can have a real conversation. They can be their real selves there. And so they're bifurcating themselves. They have sort of a public face, and they have sort of a private conversation elsewhere. Evasion is another way. So you're seeing a mass migration from public social media platforms to encrypted messaging apps. And that's a consequence of the fact that the environment, the temperature in these social platforms has gotten too hot for most people. But there's one that I think is particularly unhealthy, and that's the idea that we're internalizing this voice of hatred. When we hear the voices of hatred so much, they begin to echo and resonate inside of our own minds, inside of our own heads. Now, we're told not to pay attention to death threats on Twitter because they're meaningless. We should ignore them. That's what the folks at Twitter tell us. Don't pay any attention to that. Those aren't real death threats. That's just somebody sounding off. Don't pay any attention. Don't react to that. If you're on the receiving end, that's an impossible thing to do. You can't ignore it. When someone threatens you, or worse, when they dox you and they threaten your kids, you can't help but think through your life. When you wake up, when you leave the house in the morning, what do you do? What's your routine when you leave the house? Where do you go? Where do you stop? Where do your kids go? Who are the last persons that you saw? What was the last thing you posted? You have to run through this. You have to rehearse this incident, this theoretical incident in your mind and think about all the points in your life where you're vulnerable. You're actually having to play act the role of the terrorist in your own mind. We're letting these creeps inside of our mind. We're letting their voices inside of our mind. We're internalizing the voices of hatred. That's what's happening. And there are really genuine consequences when we normalize these abusive voices, when we allow that to be the level of discourse. Casual misogyny, casual homophobia, casual anti-Semitism, casual Islamophobia, casual racism. You see it all the time now in social media. People say, hey, it's free speech. I can say whatever I want. There's no outrage. There's no pushback. There's no decorum. There's no dignity. There's no decency. We've given all that up. We've allowed social media to drop to the lowest possible level of discourse. We've taken these voices inside of us and we said, okay, that's how people actually talk. There's a report called Misogyny on Twitter. It's worth looking at. It's a short read. It's an academic report. Researchers looked at Twitter in the UK, and they looked at hate speech directed at women for a period of time, about 5 or 6 weeks. And they found that there were millions of incidents of use of words like whore and slut and bitch. Fully 1/3 of that usage, 1/3, was what they call casual misogyny, where friends were using that language amongst themselves to talk to each other. We've internalized the voices of hatred, and now we're starting to use that language as if it were normal. Let me show you how sick this can be. A couple of years ago, a 14-year-old girl named Jada was sexually abused. And her abuser took a photograph and put it on social media, and she was laying in a funny position with her knee bent backwards. And that photo disseminated through social media, and suddenly something strange happened. Other people started to mimic the photo in their own shots, their own photos, and share them with the hashtag JadaPose. This is a deeply sick culture, folks. A child who's been abused, and the image is circulated through social media as if it's a joke, and it becomes a hashtag. Now, to her great credit, this young woman stood up and pushed back. And she said, that's not me. She said, that's a photo of my body, but that's not who I am. And the support group came forward to support her, Justice for Jada. But she's only one victim. This happens all the time. Yasmin Green worked for Google in their Jigsaw Labs group. And she convened a group of female victims of abuse from social media to find out what Jigsaw might do with artificial intelligence to ferret this menace out. And when it was revealed that she had convened this group, she too was a victim. She was attacked. She was assaulted. And this is what she had to say. She was interviewed in Wired magazine. She said, it's like you walk into Madison Square Garden and there are 50,000 people chanting, you suck, you're horrible, die. That's what it's like to be on the receiving end of one of these human botnets. Thousands of voices telling you, you suck, die. And if you really believe that's what the universe thinks about you, of course you're going to be silenced, and you might just take your own life. And that is what happened to Alexis Pilkington, who was abused on social media so much she killed herself, and Amanda Todd, who killed herself, and Tiziana Cantoni, who killed herself, and dozens of other teenagers who've been on the receiving end of the human botnet of hatred and abuse. They kill themselves. This matters, folks. This matters. Yesterday, I listened to Brian Solis speak to you about how to humanize social media messaging, how to build campaigns that connect with people on a human level. Let me tell you, this is a human issue. This is a real problem if you're trying to communicate in this environment that has been so poisoned. And I urge you to take this seriously. I urge you to take this back to your organizations, to the top of your organization, say, there is no bigger issue than this, because we cannot communicate effectively in this medium when it's a mechanism for hatred. It matters to me because I am the chairman of a foundation called the Creative Visions Foundation. And we have activists around the world, hundreds of activists who use social media to communicate and to foster positive change. They can't be as effective when they're under assault. Those voices are silenced. And it matters to you. It matters to you because you can't market in a polluted swamp. You can't be successful communicating with people when they're closing their ears and they're running for cover because they're afraid they're going to be assaulted. Trolling is destroying social media. It's destroying social media marketing. It's the single biggest threat to your organization's success in this medium, and it needs to be confronted. The great news is we already know how to solve this problem. We already know. We already know. You see, the crazy irony is you're expected to pay for this environment. Your advertising dollars are what make it possible for these social platforms to enable these horrible trolls to spread their messages. All you have to do is cut off the funding. It's that simple. And we know this works because in 2013, a boycott was organized. It wasn't that well publicized at the time. The images I'm going to show you now are shocking. I just want you to know that. I didn't collect them. They were collected by a group of activists called Women, Action, and Media, and Everyday Sexism. And these two groups grabbed screenshots on Facebook of hate groups, particularly hate groups that were aiming their messaging at women. And they organized a Facebook boycott in 2013. I'll show you a few of the images. I don't want to dwell on the images. They are horrific. And I must tell you, I edited out the worst of them. They're easy to find on the web if you want to find more. What I want to direct your attention to is the things in the red circles on the right. These are the ads that pop up next to it. Ads from IAMS, the dog food, Hugo Boss, Amex, Gold Card, Finnair, and Dove. This is a social media marketing fail. This is an online advertising fail of colossal proportion. These activists gathered these images and then they posted them on the Facebook pages and on the Twitter accounts, and they sent them to the Twitter accounts of those advertisers and held them accountable and informed them that they were no longer going to buy their products if they were going to subsidize hatred. It was a small effort with a small number of people, and it was incredibly effective. In a week, 15 advertisers agreed to pull their advertising from Facebook. And within 7 days, Facebook announced that they were going to have a new initiative to put better tools in place and to monitor hate speech, particularly hate speech directed at women. That was a win. That was a win, but that's a one-time thing. You have to remember that these social platforms are enormous businesses, and they're pulled in a number of different directions. You've got the NSA and other spy agencies that are asking them for information about terrorists. You've got law enforcement that's asking them for information about people who are committing crimes. You've got other groups that are asking them to take down, legally they must take down, child pornography images. And you've got the copyright industry that is forcing them to take down copyrighted content. Well, if you're the victim of a hate attack, if you're the victim of mass trolling, you're at the end of the queue. You come behind the copyright industry, law enforcement, and the spy agencies. You don't speak with a very big voice. We have to organize. We need to take collective action. But if advertisers join the activists and organize with them, then trust me, you will get the attention of these big platforms. And they have the capacity to clean up their act. We know they can. Facebook showed us that they can. They now have the most complete set of tools for handling abuse of any social platform. Meanwhile, Twitter has been an utter failure in this regard for the last 10 years. They have consistently failed to establish any kind of tools for meaningful action to manage trolling. 2 years ago, Dick Costello, who was then CEO, said, "We've been a failure. We suck at dealing with abuse." It's still the case. Since Jack Dorsey's return, Twitter's stock has been cut in half. The share price has been halved. Unique monthly visitors stalled out at 300 million, hasn't grown. Smartphone usage is an anemic 3 minutes a day. And they are unprofitable according to GAAP rules. Now, Twitter has an aggressive target. They want to raise revenue 7% next year. I think it's time for advertisers to have a conversation with Twitter about their tools. Not just shutting down ISIS accounts or shutting down one prominent troll, but how about a system-wide ability for people to manage abuse attacks? Right now, it's incredibly cumbersome if you're on the receiving end. You have to file a separate report for each of these attacks. You can't talk to a human being on the other side. And meanwhile, if you're on the receiving end, you can have tens of thousands of incoming attacks. It's impossible for a single person to manage this. We need a better system. The people who can make this happen are the people in this room right now. Your advertising dollars are what make it possible for these platforms to exist, and your advertising dollars can speak with a louder voice and work harder. You can actually demand that these companies take action and provide better tools. And I don't want to single Twitter out because that's not my purpose today. I think this is an issue that affects all social platforms. And unless we start to do something about it, it's going to be built into all the future platforms. Snapchat's been sort of the darling of the last few years. Snapchat just introduced in August a yellow face selfie lens. Yellow face. And they didn't seem to understand that this might be a little bit offensive to people. The most overtly racist filter ever introduced in social media. Why are social platforms socially tone deaf? It might have something to do with the fact that 90% of the staff in these companies are men, mostly white men. And they're not on the receiving end, typically, of these kinds of attacks. Maybe that has something to do with it. It's time for advertisers who try to reach everybody, not just white men, to start to speak up and demand a code of conduct from these platforms and hold them accountable to a higher standard. Even the new platforms are not immune to this kind of abuse. Just last week, a woman was testing out a new AR experience, and she was groped by another person, virtually groped. This is disgusting behavior. It's already happening. It's endemic to social platforms, and unless the platforms are informed by advertisers that you will not support them, if they permit this kind of activity, it will persist. We need, folks, new rules of the road, and I want to invite you to join me in a conversation about this. We can be inspired by the rules of the road on our highways and roads. Think about the concept of a driver's license. Okay, I'm not suggesting there should be a driver's permit for social media, of course not. But the idea of a persistent identity that actually has meaning, that's something that's really very powerful. In gaming, we already understand it, right? We don't allow a person in game to have total access. You have to earn privileges over time. You have to show that you're a good member of the community over time. And that's how we prevent people from setting up dozens and dozens or hundreds of troll accounts. That's how you keep the trolls out of a game. You make people earn their status. You make them earn their exposure. You make them earn the ability to reach large numbers of people. First, they demonstrate that they know the rules and they understand how to operate in this environment in a constructive way. That's one idea. Second idea, guardrails, the things that keep us on the road. In League of Legends, they started to experiment with this because in every social game, and every game that's got chat built into it, you have a certain amount of trash talk that starts to veer into abuse. In League of Legends, they found that if they just give people a warning that pops up and says, hey, by the way, the language you're using is a little bit offensive, that can help most people snap out of it. More than 80% of the people stop using abusive language when they get that notice. Most people want to be good. All they need are some guardrails, simple guardrails. Even airbags, the idea that you can diffuse the impact. When someone's on the receiving end of thousands and thousands of hateful messages, isn't there something that the platforms can do to detect that behavior and mitigate it in some fashion? And perhaps most importantly is we should empower other people, deputize other members of these communities to speak up with a louder voice, to flag abusive behavior, to flag hoax content, to flag malicious and misleading or propaganda content, and perhaps even moderate that commentary. Ultimately, folks, you're in the branding business. Ultimately, this is a question of trust. There is almost no trust left in our social platforms. Social discourse right now is an area where people proceed with trepidation and fear. You proceed at your own risk. It's just like driving on the road in 1908. You don't know if you can assume the other people there have good intent and are operating by the same set of rules, and so you're defensive and cautious and guarded. This is a lousy branding environment. If your goal is to build a trusted brand, you can begin by building trusted conversations in a trusted medium. And to do that, we've got to fix these broken social platforms. Thank you for your time and attention. I am Robert Tercek. It's been my pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Terrific speech. So if you guys weren't awake earlier, maybe you're a little bit more awake now. That was a tremendous, tremendous presentation by Robert Tercek. Thank you so much, Robert. We're now going to be transitioning to a kind of a montage video, some pictures over the last 24 hours, and then transitioning to our next keynote speaker.
We're 1,000 miles from comfort. We have traveled land and sea.